Yeah, I was notified it's supposed to speak on the still small voice, right? That's what it says. And if you got the King James or some of the other versions, that's what it says there in chapter 19, is a still small voice. But as you heard, as Anthony read this morning, he must be reading from the same New American Standard Bible that I use quite a bit. And it doesn't say that, does it? It said, what, a gentle blowing. And some other versions says a whisper, a gentle whisper. One of them said a gentle air. So it sort of suggests maybe that it wasn't a voice as we understand voices, or that sort of thing. Anyhow, that's all right. The question for you this morning, now think about this one, is what language does God speak? Now, I didn't make that up. I went to a seminar or a workshop or whatever you call those things up in Beamsville, Ontario, Canada, way back there in the year 2000, I believe it was. I didn't check that to make sure, but that sounds right. 2000, way back there, right? And one of the classes that they was having there was one for about this work being done in the Spanish communities in Canada. Now, the Spanish communities in Canada are different from the ones here because basically Spanish people came further south, El Salvador, and down in Honduras and those places. So it's a little bit different from the ones from Mexico and Puerto Rico and so forth that we get in this area. But not a whole lot, right? Spanish is Spanish. So one of the classes was on that, and so since we got a lot of Spanish people in this area, I thought, okay, that's a good class for me to go to. So I went to that class, and Brother, let's see, where have I got his name here? It's in here somewhere. I know, I put it on this because I know I'd forget. Santiago Molino was his name. Santiago Molino, good brother, good Spanish brother, and he gets up and he looks at the situation there and he says, well, what language does God speak? And paused for a moment, and he said, first thing when you get to heaven, you'll hear, ole! Right. And so, since I was the only Englishman in the class and everybody else was Spanish, we all had a good laugh and a very good class. So, which he did in English, by the way. Might not have had I not been there, but he did it in English, and that was very cool. So now you know. So prepare. Maybe you want to take one of those Spanish courses before you get to heaven, right? or maybe he was wrong. Right, yeah. So, yeah, I was going to went out in Spanish, or I'd probably have been lost because I didn't even take Spanish in high school, So, I make mention of time and time again that you might not believe everything the same way I do, and you might not, agree with me on everything, and that's okay. That's okay. We don't have to. Back to, Romans 14, and we have some leeway there, right? We don't have to be puppets under the same string. Just as long as we love each other, and we remind each other, we're all brothers and sisters in Jesus, and we're all headed for the same destination. We all want to be Him eternally. So keep that in mind. If I say something that you don't agree with, we can discuss it later and still be brothers and sisters in love. So, or who knows? Maybe you'll change my mind. It's been changed before. We won't talk about how many times. Oh. Elijah the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead. I had the opportunity, see, to already listen to Brant's lesson and to Brother Brian's lesson. It's kind of nice. They put them up on the website, and I can go in there and listen to them. And so I know a little bit about what you heard before, if you was here or if you did the same thing I did, right? So to hear these lessons, and they're really very good. Was there a third one? There was, wasn't there?
You're third.
I'm third. I was thinking maybe I listened to somebody else. So, okay, because I kept thinking, okay, there's been three, but no, Brant and Brian was last week, and I guess I got it this week. And so Elijah the Tishbite probably was one of the greatest prophets ever was, with the exceptions of maybe Jesus himself, Moses maybe, but Elijah never wrote a book, as far as we know. Never wrote a letter, as far as we know. And he actually covered a small span of time. Now, I didn't get back and figure out just exactly how much time span was in there, but we sort of pick him up, in 1 Kings 17, I believe. And then in 2 Kings 11, in 2 Kings 2, actually, verse 11, he's taken away. So that's not a whole lot of time, but he must have had one really terrific reputation with the people around about in the lands before he came on scene. He must have been a well-known prophet, because when he called for the king to come and meet him, the king came. Now, you or I, we're not going to call for the king to come and meet us, and the king's going to come out. He's going to say, who? What? Why? He might not even say that. He'd probably just go, that's the way it goes. So Elijah had a pretty good reputation, and he was one faithful fellow to God who trusted in God a lot, as was pointed out before. But one of the things about Elijah that I like is James tells us in the 5th chapter of the book of James, he's talking about men of prayer, the power of prayer of faithful men. And talking about that, he mentions Elijah, and he mentions Elijah as being what can happen, show you what can happen when faithful people pray to God. And what he said there, Elijah prayed that it would not rain on the face of the earth. And it did not rain for 3 years and a half until Elijah prayed again that it might rain. But he said then that Elijah was a man in our own nature, or he had the same human nature that you and I do. So we look at that. If our faith in God is as strong, we look at what Elijah did, we have the power through God to do what he wants us to do. And we don't have to back away from anything. And when you read and study Elijah, some of the things he did, like calling the king out and stuff. And the lesson last week, I put down all the prophets of Baal and so forth, and took charge and command. But where we pick Elijah up, before when I've done chapter 19, we pick Elijah up, which actually shows how human he really was, as we are. Because he had done all these great things, and he had had this mighty victory. God had given him this mighty victory over the prophets of Baal, and he had actually, when you put them all together, there was about 900, and there was 450 prophets of Baal, and then there was 500 other prophets and so forth in there, I think. So there's almost 1,000 of these, and plus all the other people that just came out to watch. And who knows whose side they're on. We have no idea how many thousands of people are out there just to watch or to see what's going to happen. Because they probably figured, Elijah's going to get his now, right? And it didn't work that way. So Elijah has a great victory, but when you pick him up in chapter 19, or actually in 18, Elijah's hiding in the cave because Jezebel has sent out the word, I'm going to get you. You're going to be dead like those prophets within 24 hours. And so we actually find Elijah in a time in his life when he is suffering from what we call depression. We call it depression. You would think, he'd be on top of the world, not afraid of anybody, but no. That little thing drove him into hiding. And so God takes care of him. That's the great thing. You see here, God takes care of him, sends down the angels to treat him for his depression. Give him some food, have him rest up, get him ready for the job that he's going to have to do. And that's really where we pick him up a little bit. And so he's in the cave, and God has sent his angel there to take care of him. And he did, and it's time now for Elijah to move on. He's got more work to do. That's part of the treatment for depression, incidentally. You got to get your nourishment, you got to get your rest, and then you got to go out and do some work. You got to get back to work, right? And do what you need to do. Now, if some of you medical people in the room don't agree with me, that's okay. I spent some time working in psychiatrics, and so I've had some discussions. But anyhow, so that's where we sort of pick him up there in 1 Kings. I want to think a little bit about, okay, so God talks to him, or he hears he's there in the cave, and as you read in the thing this morning, what? The wind blows, not a little wind, but a big wind, tornado type, cracks up the rocks. I mean, it moves the rocks around and cracks the rocks up, and it says, God wasn't in there this time. He's been in there before. He's not there this time. Then the earth quaked. When the earth shakes under your feet, that gets your attention real quick, I think. You ever felt the earth shake a little bit under your feet? It gets your attention, doesn't it? Sometimes it can do a lot of damage, but okay, and well, God wasn't in that either, Maybe Elijah was expecting something like that, and it wasn't there. Then he sent the fire. And there's great fire, and God wasn't in that either. And then, like I say, if you're reading the King James and the New King James or something in that order, it says, there was a still small voice. Or if you read New American Standard, there was a gentle blowing, which sort of indicates maybe it wasn't a real voice the way we understand it, like those other things as we understand them are not. But it got Elijah to move. Not as far as he needed to, but it got him to move actually out to the mouth of the cave, where God then talked to him and gave him his marching orders, the things that he needed to do, and moved him on. So I'm thinking about, how does God communicate with us? How has he communicated with man down through history? And I thought about these things, and apparently, from what we can gather when we go back to Genesis chapter 2 or 3, chapter 3 and 4, apparently in that period of time when man was in the garden, God communicated them real directly, like sounds like he had a habit of walking through the garden and talking to his creation, communicating and having conversations with his creation. And that actually makes sense, because there was no evil in there, and it was his creation that he loved very much. And, and for them to communicate back and forth with the Lord on that grounds, that really, that's part of paradise, isn't it? But also in that paradise we find there's another spiritual being there, also communicating with God's creation that is not good. And it comes, as we're told, in the image of a serpent, the one we know as Satan. And he persuades through speech or ever how he communicated with Eve to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which God said, don't eat of it, because if you do, then you'll die. And so we find a communication between the spiritual world and the physical world there. So they ate of the fruit, and God said, okay, you're out of here. I can't have you hanging around here in the Garden of Eden, because you just might eat of the tree of life now. And one thing we don't want a lot of evil people living forever. Okay? So he's out. And through time, God comes to Abraham. God comes to Abraham, or the Lord comes to Abraham, and he's just walking down the road as a sojourner. Abraham sees him as a man walking down the road as a sojourner. I think there was two of them, right? A pair. And he invites him into the house, or actually under the tree, because it was cooler under the tree than it was in the house. Invites him under the tree, fixes lunch for him and everything. And then the Lord reveals himself to him and tells Abraham what's going to happen and so forth. So that's Abraham's experience, and he comes to Moses in a burning bush. We read about that, how he comes to Moses in the burning bush and tells Moses what he needs to do, how he needs to go to talk to old Pharaoh. And he comes to Pharaoh first in dreams, and then later he comes to Pharaoh through Moses in signs and wonders and natural things that was used to show Pharaoh what he was doing wrong and to throw mud in the face of all those Egyptian gods. And once he came to a man named Balaam through his donkey. Now how many of you have been riding a donkey, and that donkey turns up and looks at you and said, why are you hitting me with that stick? That's going to get your attention, right? It got Balaam's attention. I'm always kind of amazed at how calm Balaam seems to be when you read it. I don't imagine he really was that calm, but it sounds kind of calm. Well, what are you talking about here? So he came through the donkey. So, and later on, he sends angels sometimes. He sends angels sometimes, and sometimes he sends other people to communicate for him, but to bring his word. The angel Gabriel appears to Mary, right, and tells her about the plans of God for her to give birth to Jesus, the Son of God. Tells Mary that. But then he comes to her husband Joseph in a dream. So God uses different forms of communication. In fact, that's what the Hebrew writer says, that in times past, God used various times and various different methods of communication. And there's times the spiritual world or the Lord uses, I think, a mind transfer, so to speak, where nothing else is there, but you get the message. Where he gets things done, and in order to get things done, to take care of his children and to answer prayers, he needs to move people, whether they're his followers or not, many times not. He needs to move them into certain places and do certain things. For instance, he had a widow down there in the land. Her and her son was about to starve to death because of that famine in the land. And they were about to starve to death, and so he sends Elijah to her. Now Elijah goes to her as a beggar. You know, he goes to this woman, picture that, goes to that lady and says, "Give me some food. I'm starving. Give me some food." And she says, "All I got's just enough here to feed me and my son, and then we're going to die because we're going to starve to death." She had no idea that her prayers had just been answered through this beggar who was begging for her last morsel of food. But that's what God did, wasn't it? That's what God did. He blessed her and saved her and her son through that beggar that came begging because she gave it to him. She gave that beggar her last morsel of food. And because of that, her morsel of food never ran out. It was always there. When she opened the pantry door, it was always there. The meal and the oil was always there. Just enough. And it was always there. Her salvation. So we don't know who God sends to us, in our time of need. How he does that. Or how he sends us to somebody else in their time of need. There's many times in my life when I look at it, and you probably know things too, and you look at the situation that happened and the things that happened and say, God's hand must have been in that. For that to come together like that, God's hand must have been in that. There's one time in my life when I'm really sure of it. We lived in Topeka, Indiana. Some of you may know where that's at. It's just a little west of LaGrange, okay? Down Amish country, real Amish country. We lived in Topeka, Indiana, and I was supposed to speak in LaGrange on Sunday morning. And I'd been working on a lesson for weeks, maybe months. And come Saturday night, I had it all put together, all the little markers in the book. Used to flip around and read a lot of scriptures, and I had little markers in there so you can know where you got to. I learned better than to do that later, but anyhow. I had it all set up. I was really comfortable with the lesson I had prepared and was ready to go on Sunday morning. So when I went to bed, I was calm and at peace. But for some reason, somewhere around 2 a.m. or somewhere in that neighborhood, I popped awake. I popped awake and I opened the book, and I don't remember the scriptures that I read, but I read scriptures that didn't apply to anything to that lesson. I jotted down a few notes. I don't know why I did it at that time, but I did. I went back to bed for a short period of time, got up, we went to services in the morning, and when I got up to speak, I gave a lesson on those scriptures that I'd read and those few notes that I wrote and written down the night before. And I still had no clue. I did. After the assembly, a lady came to me. A lady came to me that I did not know, had never seen before or since. And she explained that she was traveling from somewhere in Illinois. She told me where, I don't remember now, but somewhere in Illinois. She was headed somewhere in Pennsylvania. There was trouble and turmoil or crisis in the family, and she said she had been up days and nights agonizing over how to deal with it, how to make it better. And so she was on her journey, and she said, as I was coming down the road, I seen the sign for the church, and something nudged me, and so I stopped and I came in. And she said, the sermon you gave was exactly what I needed right now. She said, it gave me the answers I need. And now I know I can go on my journey in peace of mind, and I know what to do when I get there. I knew why I got up in the middle of the night, read scriptures I wasn't ready for, and preached that sermon. Things happen. God moves us in many ways. Just recently, while I was working on this sermon, or this lesson, not an email, it was on that Facebook thing, came across a posting there from one of my cousins named Jenny. Now, I didn't even know it at the time, but Jenny's husband had moved on from this life into the spiritual realm in February of this year. I wasn't aware of that until I read this. Because I don't get on Facebook a lot. Occasionally I do. I'm not me when I'm there, I'm teapot. So, there's a long story behind that. We won't get into that this morning. But the posting was there. Now, to give you a little bit of setting to it, so that you understand when I read it. I want to read it because she did a great job with it. And this is the end of May. He died in February, and this is the end of May. Right up almost the 27th or something like that of May. And she's making bread. She's making bread in the old-fashioned way, you know. You put the stuff together and you mix it up and all of that. And then you let it rise and you beat it down and you knead it, you know. Some of you made bread, you understand that. You really get into it. You get your hands into it, you know, and you really get the dough on your hands. Quite a bit. And so she had been making bread. Making bread like that, incidentally, is good for body and soul. I'll tell you, it's good therapy. I've done it many times. And so it is really good therapy. And so she had gotten her rings on her hand, got all doughy and stuff. So she had taken the rings off to clean them. And while she was doing it, she just had some other rings and other jewelry there, so she just cleaned the whole group of jewelry, right, and put it away. And then she writes this post that she had there on her Facebook. Let me read that. Sharing a couple of nice things that happened to me. I cleaned mine and Bob's jewelry, rinsed it and spread it out on a towel to dry, and then carried these rings and one necklace in the palm of my left hand to the jewelry box on the dresser. I placed Bob's rings, a Masonic ring, UPS ring, black onyx ring, one that belonged to his uncle, one that I don't want to know, and his wedding band into the felt slots, and my engagement ring. But my wedding band was gone, and my hand was empty. How could this happen? When I had them in the palm of my left hand, taking them out with my right, and did nothing else with them. Of course, I searched angrily and bewildered, and wondering once again about my uncertain mental condition. But I prayed for an answer. Later, I decided to rearrange the jewelry box. And when I took out Bob's wedding ring, there was mine, too, lodged inside his, a perfect fit. The other nice thing yesterday was a great big heart-shaped cloud floating above Bob's crypt. The Lord has a way of taking care of his children and providing comfort. When it comes to salvation and things of that nature, the things that stands between you and I and the rest of the world for eternal life, Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, is the final word. You know, Jesus is the Word. In fact, the last time I spoke here, I spoke about that a little bit. And he is the final word on that. And that's what the Hebrew writers says in the first two verses of Hebrews. It says, God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom he has made the worlds. However, he says that, and he is talking about the things of salvation. I say, Jesus is the final word there. There's no need for a new prophet. Muhammad, Joseph Smith, Rutherford, Mary Eddy, whatever her name is. Yeah. There's no need for new prophets. Jesus was the final and the last. But when it comes to the others, to the other communication of getting God's will done, comforting his children, answering our prayers, and setting up governments. People don't believe that, but he does. He says he does, and I believe he does. That's different. However, God never changes. So when it comes to caring for his children here on earth, I believe he communicates in various ways. We tend to pass it off as circumstantial and whatever. But it happens. So when God speaks to you, you might want to be like Samuel and say, here I am. What can I do? What do you need me for?